Podcasting, the latest frontier. These are the episodes of a Catch as Catch Can podcast. Its continuing mission: to explore strange, nerdy topics, to chat about sports, movies, sci-fi, and so much more. To boldly pod where this nerd has gone before.
Captain's Log, pod date 0729.19. On this episode of To Boldly Pod, we're going to take a quick little examination of the 6th Doctor, Peter Davison. We're going to look at his tenure. We're also going to sort of take a look back, if you will, at my old paranormal investigation days and talk about EVPs, or electronic voice phenomenon. We're also going to have a quick little sports topic about All-Star games. We have this week's To Boldly Pod question, and we have in the news. So, Scotty, set phasers on stun, engage. As most of you know, I'm kind of sort of a Doctor Who fan, and not just your run-of-the-mill fan. I've been a fan for a very long time, so I kind of watch the episodes over and over again, much like I do with Star Trek. But with Doctor Who, there's obviously a much larger scale of shows to watch, spanning over 50 years. And how I generally do it is I don't necessarily watch them in order, though I am this time. More times than not, I'll just pick out a doctor and watch his or her episodes. And I like to, in my own brain at least, call it studying. But actually, it's just me sitting down and enjoying something that I like to watch. Now, I have been watching them in order this time, and I started quite a long time ago, probably 6 months ago, with the very first Doctor in the early 60s, and the second Doctor's what episodes there are. The third Doctor, which everyone knows, John Pertwee, is my favorite. The fourth one, the most popular Doctor, Tom Baker. And I just concluded the fifth Doctor, Peter Davison, and I think with this podcast, I will take this opportunity to chat a little bit about my thoughts on the fifth Doctor. Now, first things first, Peter Davison doesn't quite get the credit that he deserves or should get from fans of Doctor Who and television experts, so to speak, because he was following the icon of the Doctor Who universe in one Tom Baker. And I really enjoyed the fifth Doctor's episodes, with a few minor exceptions. I thought the stories were great. He actually had one of the, actually not more than one, a couple of the better stories or storylines involved in the entire history of the Doctor Who universe. And one of them is often voted the Caves of Androzoni, or however it's pronounced. And it's often voted as one of the best, if not the best, stories in all of the history of Doctor Who. And it just happens to be his final serial or episode as the Doctor, as he regenerates into Colin Baker's Sixth Doctor. Now, there are some things that I really liked and I sort of didn't like. And one thing, if you go back and watch them, you have to keep in mind that these episodes were all in the early to mid 1980s, and television show budgets weren't exactly, shall we say, padded like they are these days. It was more an era of story and get the episodes out, and we'll deal with the science fiction / special effects at a later date. And it shows. So some of the costumes, some of the monsters, a lot of the effects in his tenure are subpar, or what people would watch now and say, man, this is really cheesy. So you kind of have to set that aside when you're watching his episodes and just appreciate the storylines that are involved. And one thing that did happen in the Fifth Doctor's tenure, and still to this day, technically, is the only time it has happened, and that is one of his companions, one of his traveling friends, died as part of the show. And that was something they'd always shied away from. I mean, you see a lot of death on the program, but they always shied away from killing off main characters, and they actually had the character Adric, who at the time, and even for people that watch it now, got really annoyed with him because he was a young boy, a braggadocious, I suppose would be a way to put it, character that really rubbed people the wrong way. Now, the companions that he had with him were Adric and Nyssa, which were holdovers from the Fourth Doctor, and to a lesser extent Tegan, and they also had Turlough and Chameleon and Perry at the very end of his tenure. And one of the downsides that I really had, probably the only one I really had for the entire 3-year run of the Fifth Doctor, was the companions, because much like other people, I wasn't a huge fan of Adric, nor was I a fan of Tegan or Turlough, although I appreciated Turlough's storyline. And Chameleon and Perry really don't count since they were at the end. But one thing I really liked is I liked the character of Nyssa, having her held over a little bit from the Fourth Doctor. And that was one character that I was really kind of sad that they never developed more and made more of sort of a companion focal point, where they did with Tegan and Adric and Turlough to a lesser extent. The one thing they sort of did that was negative to me was she was a young girl, so they kind of, at one point, sort of sexed her up as she was leaving the show, and I would have to read in to see if that's why she left or if they just didn't renew her contract, whatever. I'm not that versed on the ins and outs of the production. I just enjoy the programs. But all in all, and I always rank the Fifth Doctor sort of in the middle of the pack for my preferred doctors. He was a good doctor, entertaining doctor, and a stark contrast to the Tom Baker Doctor, and a even bigger contrast, sort of a bigger contrast to his predecessor, which was Colin Baker and the Sixth Doctor. But I'm into the Sixth Doctor now, so once I finish his run, which was shorter, and we'll discuss that when we get to it. But if you have any thoughts about the Fifth Doctor, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at TooBoldlyPod. And as you can probably tell, I'm always up for coming on here and talking about Doctor Who. Now, our sports topic for the day, and you can go ahead and laugh at me now because I really can't explain to you why I even watched this, but I did. And what I'm talking about is the WNBA All-Star Game. And I pretty much watched the whole game. And I wasn't even drinking. So, no, jokes aside, I have nothing against the WNBA or women's athletics as a rule. I mean, good for them. If they're out doing it, making a living doing it, enjoying doing it, have at it. Men, women, it doesn't really matter to me. My whole question has nothing to do with gender, has nothing to do with basketball. It has to do with all-star games. And it goes from the WNBA All-Star Game to the NBA All-Star Game to the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. And I won't even talk about the damn Pro Bowl. And we can throw in the NHL's All-Star Game. Why do they bother having these? They're basically just out there running around, or skating in hockey's case, doing nothing. They're not showing off their skill because their defenders aren't playing defense. They're not showing off their athleticism because, I mean, I guess to an extent they kind of are, but you're really not showing off your talent in modern day all-star games because these aren't serious competitions. So how are you there showing off what made you an all-star when, and you know, just going sidetrack as a fan? I mean, yeah, I sat there and watched the WNBA one, but I have no explanation as to why other than there was nothing else on. But why would fans pay to go see that, for one? I certainly wouldn't. Is it for the odd chance of maybe meeting one of the athletes, getting an autograph? Maybe, I suppose that could be part of the reason, but it seems to me if I was a player, I would appreciate the acknowledgement of being one of the game's best players, but I wouldn't want to go play in it if I'm not going to play. Because sports, if nothing else, is a competition. And competition usually means you try to become victorious. Rarely do you see people going out in a competition or a sporting event and trying to lose. Unless, of course, they're tanking. And it's an all-star game, so why would they be tanking? So my question to all of you out there is, A, do you care about all-star games? B, are you entertained by all-star games? And C, should they just get rid of all all-star games if they're just going to be walk-through exhibitions? Let me know your answer on Facebook or Twitter at TooBoldlyPod. And this week's Too Boldly Pod question, I think, is a very cool question, and I'm sort of disappointed that I didn't get more responses than I did, but I kind of asked it sort of late, ergo not very many responses to it. And if you don't know, each and every week we ask a question on social media. It's usually a harmless little question just to sort of give everyone a chance to chime in with their thoughts or their opinions. Now, this week's question was, sequels are a mainstay in Hollywood. Seems like every popular movie gets sequeled, even some 30 years later, like Top Gun. That said, what movie would you like to see a sequel made from? And as I stated, I didn't get a ton of replies, but I did get some. Now, Dave replied Friday the 13th. Don't think they have quite finished the story yet, but seriously, I will say Beetlejuice, Spaceballs, The Fifth Element, E.T., and Close Encounters. But they would probably all be meh. Then he went on to say, oh, I forgot Big Trouble in Little China, too. Noted author and host of a plethora of podcasts and radio shows, Paul said Beetlejuice has potential and went on to say Bubba Hotep, but that's never going to happen. Bubba Hotep, sorry. Sandshoe said, I always wanted to see a sequel to They Live, but now Roddy Piper is gone. Sad emoji. Kate replied, I racked my brain on this question all day and came up with Napoleon Dynamite. I'd like to see what they could do with those characters, see where they all ended up. And Jim replied, real genius. Now, I too, much like Kate, sort of racked my brain about this. There's more movies that I sort of wish they wouldn't have made a sequel to, and maybe that was the question I should have asked. Maybe I will. But the example of that was Independence Day was so great, and then they came out with that sequel a few years ago, and it was just horrible. And you know what? There were all kinds of movies that I loved so much that I always wanted to see more, but I really couldn't nail down. I think there's something to be said for movies that are so fantastic that you want more, but usually when you get a sequel, you're always disappointed. Again, Major League, awesome. Major League 2, terrible. But then you get Airplane was great, and so was Airplane 2. So I really don't have an answer, but I'll keep thinking about it, and if you have a movie that you would love to see a sequel made from, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at TooBoldlyPod. Now, a lot of you know that I have a keen interest in things of a very paranormal sense. I'm a firm believer in aliens and some UFOs. I am a believer in ghosts and other things, and if you listened to last week's podcast, you heard Rob and I discussing our investigation into the Paulding Light phenomenon here in Michigan. But what a lot of you may not know is about 10 years ago, I was operating a paranormal group where we went and did ghost hunts. And I won't say that my view has changed on ghostly phenomenon in that time since I did it, but I will say I have since become more free to discount something without more empirical proof. And the reason that I bring that up is recently I found a bunch of our old EVPs that we have on a hard drive here from The Other Side of Life, which was the name of our paranormal group. And I was listening to a lot of them, and I'm like, that one you can explain. That one is obviously somebody that could be this, that could be that. But there are a handful of them that I still to this day cannot explain. And most of the reason I can't explain it is because I know the circumstances of where we were at. I know exactly where everybody at the investigation was at. And even 10 years ago, the technology wasn't quite to where it is today with faking things or making things up and whatnot. At least with the extent of somebody with a small-time paranormal group that has no budget for special effects or computer training or anything like that. So the reason I even bring it up is, like I said, you all know that I have this fascination with the paranormal, and I still get interested in going out and investigating this stuff. I just have more of a skeptic's eye these days, but like I said, there are still some that we investigated and heard at the time that I still can't explain to this day. And am I going to put on that they were a ghost? I mean, I guess if you put my feet to the fire, I would have to probably answer on a stack of Bibles. Yeah, it probably is, but do I know that with a resounding fact? No, I don't. But now, one of the reasons that I kind of quit doing it as much as I was back then was because it got so flooded with people wanting to do it. It got so flooded with fakes and stuff, making stuff up. And that all stems from the how it got inundated on television with all the paranormal shows and everything, and it was proven a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them were creating these situations and passing them off to the viewers as real. And it sort of burned me out on the whole paranormal field for quite a while. I still maintained my interest in it, but my desire to research or investigate waned because of all the negativity that I saw that was coming from the media and all the attention that it was receiving. Now, that said, I am going to play a clip for you that I found from one of our investigations from 2007, and it's an EVP, and if you don't know what that is, that stands for electronic voice phenomenon, which you would take recorders with you, digital recorders at the time. We didn't have any laptop recorders or anything really fancy. We would try to capture the voices of spirits that may have been in the dwelling that we were at. Now, before we get into it, I just want to explain to everybody, and I know this is just me explaining so you can believe it or not, but even back then, we sort of went out of our way to avoid what people would call contamination, meaning if our entire group went with us, we would split up a lot of times, and one group would talk and the other group would basically sit in silence. And in this particular clip that I'm going to play, it was only 3 of us. So it was only 3 people in the dark of the night, if you will, sitting in this establishment that we were brought in to investigate. And before I play the clip, a funny thing about this is we captured some stuff on video that was, I mean, it's intriguing. You couldn't say it's for sure a ghost. It's just an interesting video clip, which I know I have it somewhere. I'll have to dig it out sometime. But we also captured this audio, and we played it for the business owner at the time, and they closed shortly thereafter, and it was a couple years later that our team member Matt found out somehow that this person used his excuse for his failing business on the fact that his business was haunted, and he cited us as an example as to the proof of his failing business. So I'm guessing this was all in the bankruptcy part, and I'm also going to guess that they probably laughed that off. But fact of the matter is, we went in to investigate this business. It was in a very small town, so there wasn't a lot of foot or car traffic driving past this house or this business in the middle of the night. And it was a very quiet town after dark, so you can rule that sort of contamination predominantly out. So it was only the 3 of us, and this was approximately 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning when Jason and Matt and myself were sitting upstairs in this business, and you'll hear Jason, Matt, and I sort of talking off in the distance because we had the recorder sitting by the steps, and you seem to get a voice that's closer to the recorder than the 3 of us are give a response to Jason after he says, we either need to get up and go downstairs, yada, 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 we're about to fall asleep. So what you're going to hear is the clip as it appeared on the recorder, and then I will come back and talk a little bit more about what we captured.
I'm saying we either need to get up and go down, or
Basically, you're about to.
yeah. I'm saying you're about to fall asleep, so
Sorry, you know what, that's fine. I was really kind of kidding. I suppose you know that.
yeah.
Now there you heard the clip just as it appeared on the recorder, where you heard Jason and Matt and I talking about getting tired and going downstairs. And Jason says, you either need to show us you're here, or we're going to get up and go downstairs, where at that point we kind of hear a voice, as I stated, closer to the microphone, kind of gravelly voice saying, "I'm here." Now I'll play the whole clip again, and then this time it'll have a loop where it'll replay a couple of times.
I'm saying we either need to get up and go down, or
Basically, you're about to.
yeah. I'm saying you're about to fall asleep, so
Sorry, you know what, that's fine. I was really kind of kidding. I suppose you know that.
yeah.
Kind of kidding. I suppose you know that.
Yeah.
Kind of kidding. I suppose you know that.
Yeah.
Now, am I going to officially say that that is a ghost? I mean, if you're going to ask me my 51% of whether I think it was a ghostly voice, yes, I do think it was, because picking up that voice wasn't the only odd experience we had that evening. Do I think every place is haunted and every ghost sighting is real? No, I really don't. But capturing stuff like that is what keeps my fascination with things of a paranormal nature. So if you have any thoughts about this audio clip, or maybe you're a paranormal investigator and would like to come on here and talk about your investigations, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod. And in the news this week, and this comes courtesy of my buddy Dave, who's going to be joining us next week here on this very podcast. It comes from The Guardian, The Observer, and the headline is "Passenger in Clown Suits Prompted Mass Cruise Ship Brawl, Says Witnesses. Staff injured after a late-night fight breaks out in a buffet area on board a P&O vessel." Yeah, this is a pretty in-depth story. A holidaymaker dressed as a clown prompted a mass brawl on a cruise ship in which passengers used furniture and plates as weapons, according to witnesses. The late-night fight in the buffet area on board the P&O Britannia left members of the staff injured as they tried to intervene while onlookers fled the scene. The brawl, which took place in the early hours on their way back from the Norway's fjords, reportedly followed an alcohol-fueled afternoon of patriotic partying on deck. The perpetrators were said to have been confined to their cabin for the last day of the cruise. A 41-year-old woman and a 43-year-old man from Essex were arrested by Hampshire police on suspicion of assault when the ship docked in Southampton on Saturday morning. Now, the story goes on to read a whole lot more, but it doesn't give a whole lot more detail. Okay, so you're drinking, you're getting kind of drunk, you're on a cruise ship, you start a fight. That I get. That happens, I suppose. I've never been on a cruise, but what the hell's up with the clown suit? What, they get so hammered that they went back to their room and like, let's dress up as a clown and go start a bunch of stuff. It just makes me think this. What the hell is wrong with mankind? And that's going to wrap up this episode of Too Boldly Pod. I hope you enjoyed the show. Coming up in a future podcast, actually I teased it earlier, my buddy Dave's going to join us next week, and I'm kind of keeping it on wraps what we're going to discuss because, quite frankly, he hasn't completely told me yet. And you heard our little ghost section earlier on this podcast. I'd really like to put together a spooky couple podcasts for closer to Halloween. So if you have a great ghost story and like to come on here or share it with me to read on here, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod, and we'll set something up. I think that would be a fun little podcast for Halloween, but that's months down the road. So, as usual, I don't have a closer for this program, so I'll simply say this. No, drugs are for losers, and hypnosis is for losers with big weird eyebrows. Have a good day, everybody.
WLLP, Spock Rock Radio.